Radio Days Africa is proud to lead the conversation and learning. The next session is about to start at RDA 18.
Okay, maybe you can take that next subsequent, or at the latter end of the session. Yeah, is the mic on? Okay, cool. Morning, my name is Kabelo. Welcome to the first session of the morning, the Zimbabwe sessions, very exciting. It will be a panel session this morning. Our guest speaker, Taurai Mabhachi, who has two other companions with them, unfortunately don't have their full names. So to be safe, I'm going to Dale and just make the judgment now, but it's going to be very interesting. It will be more of a dialogue, I believe, the format. But then you'll be able to ask questions. I'm assuming the audience will be able to ask questions thereafter. Fantastic. I was asked to please, and mention the point that please hashtag LDA18 and engage in the conversation, perhaps comment. We'll really appreciate it, or hashtag storyteller as well. At Radio Days Africa, we'll really appreciate it. I was also asked to announce that the 12:30 innovation panel that will be taking place in track 1. The panel will include Andile Masuku, co-founder and executive producer of African Tech Roundup, Jonas Reef, CTO of Upspeak, an app from Germany, Claire Mawisa, a beloved television presenter and radio personality, and Nelly Kalu, controversial broadcast journalist from Nigeria. So it's bound to be a very interesting conversation in track 1 at 12:30, so perhaps just don't miss that. I know it's just before lunch, and it's been 5 days for some of us who walked this long road. Okay, it's bound to be exciting. Welcome, and cool, we can commence. Thank you.
All right, I think I'm probably just going to have to switch this around a bit. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Michael Schmidt. I'm the admin secretary of the Professional Journalists Association of South Africa, and we basically are the only organisation that issues press cards to freelancers, and our membership is open to working journalists who are both journalists from abroad working in South Africa, or South African journalists working in South Africa or abroad. So it's not that narrowly defined. Anyway, the debate today is taking a look at the liberalization of the airwaves in Zimbabwe in the post-coup era and going into the elections, which are scheduled for the 30th of July. And I first of all want to introduce Taurai Mabhachi. On my right there, my extreme right I should say, Taurai is the coordinator of Media and Technology Trust, which is a Harare-based NGO, a non-profit that is dedicated to particularly opening up the airwaves in Zim, with a strong focus on the establishment of community radio stations, and making sure that the voice of youth gets on air. The youth population of Zimbabwe is really significant and is becoming a big driver of change in the country, and their voices need to be heard, and particularly rural communities that are usually excluded from the national debate. And Taurai will talk to you a little bit about MTT and also its project Radio Freedom, which is its own project to establish a radio station with a rather resonant name, I'm sure you all will agree. And then Dr Dale McKinley is a Zimbabwean analyst and an activist who's been very involved in press freedom and related issues, and he's going to give us a little bit of a scene setter on what's happening in Zimbabwe in the run-up to the elections, particularly with the president's stated intentions of liberalizing the country. What does that really mean? Perhaps I can hand directly over to Dale to set the scene for us in the run-up to the elections, and I'll ask him a few questions. We'll bounce backwards and forwards, and then I'll hand over to Taurai, and he can talk through the campaign to get community stations on air in Zim, and the various aspects to that campaign and how far that has progressed. Over to you, Dale.
Thanks, Michael, and thank you for the opportunity. My input will be quite brief. I think it just in order to understand, set the context properly in the present, just to have a little bit of history, not a great deal because you don't have a great deal of time, but just to sort of to understand where we've come from in regards to the post-coup situation. I think as many of you know, when the new constitution was adopted in Zimbabwe quite some time ago, like our constitution, the rights included there with regard to freedom of expression and specific law of broadcasting are quite encompassing in terms of at least what's on paper there, and setting up the proper mechanisms and laws. Well, in Zimbabwe, it's the Broadcasting Services Act, the BSA, and of course the Broadcasting Authority of Zimbabwe, which is BSZ, which are the two enabling, sort of the piece of legislation and enabling authority. The problem is, of course, as what we've seen in many countries, but in Zimbabwe as well, is between intent and practice. So what happened, obviously, after in the first round of calls, I think back in 2005, for applications for licenses and everything else, there's this sort of idea that yes, we're freeing up the airwaves, we're going to make sure that we can licenses from private companies and radio stations, and I think it was one television license was done, were all sort of accepted in a process. And then of course what happened, much like it reminds me here in our own country in South Africa about the commissions, where you set up a commission and then it sounds all great and then it just gets sort of strung out over years and years and years and years in the process, or the court system, same in Zim. So that essentially didn't go anywhere. And all of those licenses were basically either, not necessarily rejected outright, but certainly were either left to the side or were pushed, and nobody got one. And then we had another sort of set up and round in 2011 after the unity government, and there was again a lot of pledges for opening up the airwaves. Same kinds of things happened. A whole range of, this time with cost applications, fees and levies that were put onto this thing, public hearings that didn't happen, delays, obfuscation, lack of information that was given about what needed to be in applications, foreign funding requirements in particular, where the applications were rejected because they said no, they don't meet the requirements, which are of course arbitrarily determined about foreign funding, how much percentage of foreign funding behind the station. So that the bottom line is up until the events with the coup, that there was, like in Zimbabwe, for those of you who followed Zim, and there's the appearance of normality. And then you scratch a little bit underneath the surface and you realize that actually the legislation, the law, it all is there in terms of enabling, but underneath. And Mnangagwa and what has happened has not changed any of that. Let's be very clear. There's no indication in terms of legislatively or otherwise. There's lots of promises about opening up and so forth and so on. But with regards to any of the processes that have happened that would have been a change from the past practice, there's no such thing. And in fact, if one looks at the lead up to the elections now, this is fundamentally important, as it was in 2008, as it was in 2005, and previous elections when Mugabe was running the show, is that just like in any country where there's no diversity, no ideological diversity, no political diversity, no socio-cultural diversity within the airwaves, other than that which is clandestine or not or illegal, you don't have, the voters obviously can't be informed, there can't be proper debates. We know all of these kinds of things. So state control, party control, anything that's aligned to the ZANU-PF, anything that's aligned, gets to go ahead. And that has not changed. Anything has fundamentally changed in Zimbabwe since that time. That's going to obviously have huge impacts, because as you know, in Zim particularly, radio is the main form of communication, particularly for rural folks. And when there is no space for alternative voices, when there's no space for debates, when there's no space for even, in many cases, criticisms and raising policy issues and having those kinds of discussions, well, the electorate is much less informed. There's no ability for opposition parties, in which case it's not just the MDC, now I can't keep up with how many MDCs there are now these days, but it's the splits, I think over 100 parties are contesting the elections. And there's no space for any of them really. to contest that space. So what is the overall picture? The overall picture is the status quo, fundamentally, at least at a practical level. At a political level, there's a lot of talk about these kinds of things, but that's not going to do anything in the lead up to the elections at the moment. So political control and what I would call soft authoritarianism. And this is the interesting thing is it's Zimbabwean and ZANU-PF have perfected the art of what I call soft authoritarianism, which is the idea that when you look at things, it doesn't look like there's a major crackdown. So Mnangagwa is like, we're different from Mnangagwa. We're not going to go out into the streets and beat people up. We're not going to go and attack them. We're not going to be violent. But what you do is you cut all the corners for public participation, for voice, for alternative. You corral it. And you do so softly. You do it through legislation, through delays, through bureaucratization, through a whole range of other things. It seemed natural. It seemed like they're not necessarily hard. It's not hard power, it's soft power. And as a result, the critique of it becomes quite difficult because they say, but the law is there, yes, we'll get there. We're just having a difficulty in practical funding, so forth and so on. But in fact, what happens is this has now been the case for how many years? Almost 2 decades. And there's no sign that this is going to change. So that is the reality of the situation in the sort of the macro context. And it's, what that means for not necessarily those that are outside and trying to open up those airwaves or trying to assist those in Zimbabwe who are trying to do so, and for Zimbabweans themselves, is there's very strategic and tactical questions, because the assumption in Zimbabwe has always been, if we have political change, we'll get legislative change, we'll open up the idea. And that has always been a disappointment, even with the GNU. There was the expectation that things were going to immediately sort of, a sort of Arab Spring kind of situation. So, and that did not happen. So what we have is we have a continuing state of where the acceptance of this sort of status quo becomes very disempowering. It becomes very disillusioning for a lot of people, and the idea that, well, this is the way it's always going to be. And what's clearly necessary is that in order for these the airwaves to be opened up, in order for the legislation to be properly implemented, you're going to have a political struggle. And it's not simply going to come about by potentially the MDC, getting another 40% of the seats and contesting power at the top level. We've seen that doesn't really make the difference. It is, and it always has been in Zimbabwe, the ability of grassroots organizations and civil society and everything to, along with international forces, to push open that space and to force it open. So, yeah, that would be the overall perspective.
Yeah, might I just say that one of the problems with this sort of this soft power approach and this kind of stasis that is set in Zimbabwe is that the international community that should be giving this kind of solidarity has been sucked into this system of stasis, where civil society organizations, the very things that we're hoping will carry things forward and liberalize or democratize society, I should say, are deeply interpenetrated by ZANU-PF agents, and yet the foreign donor funding still flows to these organizations. So a lot of supposedly independent organizations are deeply compromised and are sucking up foreign funding that could go to more legitimate projects, but those legitimate projects are not really allowed to see the light of day. And that's something that Radio Freedom has been experiencing in its fight. Turning to, thank you for that, Dale. Turning to Radio Freedom now and the project there. As Dale has indicated, there are 10 community radio stations that have been waiting to get on air for something close to 15 years now. These fall under the umbrella of the Zimbabwe Association of Community Radio Stations, ZACRAS. MTT's project is designed to really promote and support the ability of these stations to get license and to get channel allocation. The state, part of the delaying tactic has been to, first of all, claim that there's insufficient actual channels available, which Taurai will interrogate now. Also that there's a merger of institutions ongoing at the moment, that there's delays due to supposed digital migration. But Taurai, if you could explain a little bit more of the technical aspects of what the state is throwing up as hurdles, and whether or not there's any truth to their claims that are essentially occasioning all of these delays.
Thank you, Mike, for this. First and foremost, I think what must be borne in mind in terms of the Zimbabwean person is the fact that we have got a regime in the country that really pretends. In fact, I'm talking of the successive governments of ZANU-PF. They've been very good at pretending that they will be able to do all sorts of things to better the lives of the people, be it in relation to students, be it in relation to academia, be it in relation to mining or any other productive issue that we experience in the country. We've seen what happened during the land reform program. At first value, we were told that no, everyone is benefiting, land is going to Zimbabweans. But the truth of the matter is, land went to ZANU-PF supporters. And that is the reality at the moment, and it will continue to be the reality that ZANU-PF has managed to amass all the land in the country under the guise of land reform program. So when it comes to the issues of radio broadcasting services and systems in the country, it will be very, very impossible for them to allow a situation where there will be diverse broadcasting stations. In this, I'm referring to a situation where we are not only referring, or we are not only talking of plurality in broadcasting. We are talking of a situation where there is diversity. Diversity actually means radio stations that represent various viewpoints. On that, I would want to actually touch on the public broadcaster in the country. The public broadcaster is literally controlled by ZANU-PF, in the sense that all the channels that are there at the moment churn out ZANU-PF propaganda, be it on issues of land, be it on issues of the missing diamonds in Marangi, be it on women issues. It's all to do with how ZANU-PF views issues. It's not about how the Zimbabwean view issues. I think for those that were following the Zimbabwean history in terms of the licensing of broadcasters, especially radio, we have an example of Capital Radio, which tried to operate in Zimbabwe, including Skies FM. They are all owned by Alpha Media Holdings. They tried to broadcast, but they were denied channels. We've got a Radio VOP. It tried very hard enough to make sure that it gets on air. It was denied the opportunity to do the same. Way after that, way after their attempts, I'm talking of those that attempted to apply for licenses. They came in 2015, a call for applications that was done by the Broadcasting Authority of Zimbabwe under the Broadcasting Services Act, which actually allows for a 3-tier system of broadcasting. What happened was a lot of other prospective broadcasters tendered their applications, and the only such people that were successful are those that are aligned to ZANU-PF. We can talk of Star FM, which is controlled by Zim Papers, which is the government newspaper company. Then we have ZFM, which is owned by the ZANU-PF Member of Parliament, Mr. Superman Dwanzi. We are talking of what is this Star FM. It was given another channel in Taurai to control what is called Diamond FM. So Star FM and Diamond FM are owned by Zim Papers, a government newspaper combined. Then we have ZFM, and Heo in Mashimbo, they are all run by Mr. Superman. So what we can actually deduce from this is the fact that we have a government that pretends that it is there to open up the airwaves. The list can go on and go on like that. We have Nyam Nyam in the Victoria Falls. It is controlled by ZANU-PF functionaries. And the other station in Bulawayo, which is controlled by Konde Mhlanga and his other colleague, they are all aligned to ZANU-PF. We all know that. So the issue of pluralism without diversity will not help the broadcasting situation in Zimbabwe, because that is the main problem we have. We tend to be told that, no, look here, we are democratizing the airwaves in a situation that would actually suit everyone, but that's not the case. I'll give you a very, very brief example of how the president, head of state, is not honest in dealing with issues. When he was at a state visit in Botswana, he was asked by a journalist whether the diaspora vote was going to be allowed. He categorically said that, no, look here, we allow for a diaspora vote, but the problem is that we don't have capacity. But when we talk of the writing of the new constitution in the country, it actually involved government at the donor world. Why didn't they actually ask, say, development partners like the UNDP to help in that respect? Anyway, let me just rush on to the issue of the technical aspects. Currently, there is a lie that, you people wait for digitization, because digitization is going to address all the problems in terms of radio broadcasting, because there is digital multiplexing. We'll have so many channels. But what the statement from government officials fail to appreciate is the fact that we've got what is called dual illumination, where you can use the analog and digital systems together or side by side. And at the moment, the FM band is still very much usable in terms of how it is configured under the International Telecommunications Union. It's quite an easy thing that we, at the moment, can make use of the analog system of broadcasting as we digitize. And in any case, the current digital system that is being implemented is called the digital terrestrial television. It largely relates to TV. Then we haven't yet reached a stage where we are doing the digital audio broadcasting that is mainly or predominantly for radio. But recently, there were utterances by the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Media, Information and Broadcasting Services, to the effect that we want to actually create a single organization that will be able to handle all broadcasting issues, because the main problems that we have at the moment relates to bureaucracy, because of so many organizations. But in my own analysis, what that means is, if they're going to come up with a legislation that is going to collapse all these organizations that are dealing with matters of radio broadcasting, or should I say broadcasting, like the Postal and Telecommunications Regulatory Authority of Zimbabwe, the Broadcasting Services Act, and Transmedia. I don't see them being very honest again, but the trust, or their trust, should I say, is meant to actually darken or frustrate the process under the guise of creating a new organization that will handle all the issues, because they never gave timelines as to when that will happen or when that will be finished. The other problematic issue that we have relates to the Broadcasting Authority of Zimbabwe. It is solely mandated with making a decision or decisions as to when it can do a call for applications to those that may want to broadcast. They don't actually respond to, or should I say, they don't actually get the mandate from anybody accept the law that empowers them to do so. But the law itself is very vague because it doesn't actually clearly stipulate how they're supposed to do it, particularly in relation to being accountable to the people, to the citizens. Because it cannot just be their own bail to say, okay, fine, we'll do a call for application as and when we deem it necessary. That is the current arrangement in the country. So it is quite problematic, even if this new organization or department is going to be created. It can still be a problem if it maintains the same scenario where it won't be accountable to anybody in terms of when it will actually go or do a call for applications. The suggestion which was made under the Information Media Panel of Inquiry, which was instituted by the then Minister of Media, Information and Broadcasting Services, Professor Jonathan Moore, was that bars must do a call for applications twice a year to allow for those that may want to actually go on air to get the opportunity. So, surprisingly, the recommendations which were made under the Information Media Panel of Inquiry seem not to be implemented at the moment, because we've never seen anything of that sort happening. For example, in terms of content, regulation, licensing, and promoting diversity in broadcasting. The Information Media Panel of Inquiry was instituted in 2013, and I think by 2016 it was actually through, because it delayed, it was through with its findings. So at the moment, we are still back, we are, or should I say, we are yet back to another beast, which is saying, no, look here, I'm going to be ensuring that everything gets done. Because at a business conference in Victoria Falls, the president himself was asked by the business people that gathered there whether there was going to be the liberalization of the airwaves. He said, yes, we're going to ensure that there were many voices on air as a matter of agency. So there were many voices on air as a matter of agency. So, well, I'm talking of a situation that is happening in terms of mere lip service from government officials at the expense of the real action on the ground. So, since we don't have much time, all I can say at the moment is that, or should I say, the main emphasis should be utilizing the FM band as digitization happens. There shouldn't be any excuses on that, because according to the International Telecommunications Union, that FM band is still usable. At a technical level, it is regarded as a G84. So it is still usable, and let the government not dilly-dally allocating channels to radio stations at the moment, especially those that have shown serious effort to be on air, like the ones controlled or running under the Zimbabwe community radio stations, or should I say the Zimbabwe Association of Community Radio Stations, then the ones controlled by Alpha Media Holdings. We also have got Radio VOP. All these stations must be allowed to be on air.
Cool. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to interject.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you so much. It sounds like a very interesting situation there in Zimbabwe. I'm going to make a rather radical hypothesis here, but because there is a belief that many Zimbabweans, particularly black populations, were far better educated, for example, than their South African counterparts. Because of the education system in Zimbabwe, one tends to assume that the level of sophistication and manipulation that can come through with using pretexts, with amorphous legislation that tends to reach a particular ends, expedient ends, is for particular reasons, I would assume. What I'm trying to say is, that level of intelligence sophistication, I believe, has contributed, I think, to an extent to the system that you seem to characterize as soft repression or soft authoritization. It just feels that way sometimes. Because I think that's what differentiates Zimbabwe in a way from context in East Africa, West Africa, and others, where I think it's sort of different. We've got a few minutes left. Could you perhaps succinctly maybe raise a few of your points, and then perhaps we could invite questions to the floor, please.
Okay, thank you so much. From my side, I'd say first of all that MTT has been conducting very intensive negotiations with technical entities such as the International Telecommunications Union, trying to really establish the veracity of the government's claims and finds them to be sorely lacking. Comparative analyses between the available bandwidth in Zimbabwe and other countries demonstrate that although we know bandwidth is a finite resource, there's more than sufficient space to get community stations up and running. The problem at the moment going into the elections, I'd say just very briefly, is that we've got a scenario where the country operates on a rumor mill rather than on a news cycle. So we don't really know whether it's true that 5,000 plainclothes army officers are deployed into rural areas to bolster ZANU-PF support. This is the rumor going around. If we actually had that community radio layer, our chances of establishing the veracity or otherwise of that claim would be much higher. I'm pretty sure that the rumor mill surrounding whether or not the so-called G40 dissidents were responsible for the 23rd of June bomb blast at the ZANU-PF rally would also be a little bit more illuminating. So that gap is very, very damaging to Zimbabwean civil society, and the fact that it's really been held in abeyance for so long is critical.
Okay, just a couple of, in response to your, in terms of, does it make Zimbabwe unique in terms of the soft power? I don't think so. And the reason why, I mean, I don't necessarily think it has much to do with the levels of education. Most of the people that you would, in Zimbabwe, that have benefited from those levels of education are no longer in Zimbabwe. About a third of the entire population, most of the professional class, most of the intellectual class are no longer there. But that said, I think what the difference is this, is that ZANU-PF a long time ago understood, and this, we don't have time to go back to this in the politics, but that the opposition and those who are calling for diversity and everything were very much had bought into the institutional realm. They believed fundamentally that if you won elections and that if you changed it, that things could change. They didn't understand, and I think this is the fundamental conundrum of Zimbabwean politics, is that a lot of the opposition has not understood very clearly that ZANU-PF does not care fundamentally about the law. You do not care about the judiciary. They do not care about these things when push comes to shove. They will manipulate it, they will use it to whatever extent. So there's this lull of a sense of, come into the institutional process, come and talk to us, we'll put the right laws in, we'll put all the things in, but then in terms of implementation, forget it. And if you try to mobilize, we'll smash you. And I think it's a strategic and tactical question. We can debate policy all day long. We can debate how the technical aspects all day long. But fundamentally, this is a political and strategic question, I would argue, that is about the opposition forces or those that want change and to begin to think of new creative ways. And let me just put it out there. I mean, this includes, for example, on the airwaves this was back from the late 90s, of clandestine airwaves. And so if the entire official space gets closed down, then the possibilities of debating and putting up a parallel system has to be put onto the agenda. Because if you continue to butt your head against the wall, all you're going to do is get more bloody and bloody. Sorry. Yeah. Cool.
Thank you. Yeah. Just to give a synopsis, the point I'm trying to make is in my political studies, the characterization I just gave, the human dynamic also plays a role. And if you pay attention, for you to develop that kind of level of sophistication, you need some kind of education. You have to elevate your sense of IQ, I would assume, and that's the point I'm trying to make.
Okay.
And if you compare it to other areas, it's quite different from East Africa, Southern Africa, or Western Africa. Okay, cool. I would like to invite questions, please. We can only take perhaps 3. Okay, you have to come, yeah, unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. I get a sense that media is polarized in Zimbabwe, that the space is really shrinking. I wanted to understand, basing on the understanding what was happening in the Arab Spring, like media, in terms of mainstream media, that was shrinking, but our colleagues used the other side to get to send their message, social media engagement. I want to understand, in the Zimbabwe situation, how engaging or interactive is social media and how widespread is it in terms of people advocating for the rights of freeing up the space? In Zambia, where I come from, we're not that good. And we have always thought that Zimbabweans are more educated, black Zimbabweans are more educated than the Zambians. And so I want to get to understand that, the dynamics that was happening with the Arabs, how it plays out in Zimbabwe.
Taurai?
The issue of social media is quite an important one, and it's happening in Zimbabwe very much. But the greatest problem with social media is that it is mainly enjoyed by the middle class and the educated. Radio in itself is cheaper, widely accessible, and is capable of breaking the barriers of illiteracy. You actually understand the background of Africa, and it will in a very big way help us. I want to respond to the issue of Zimbabwe being educated. Yes, Zimbabweans are educated, but the greatest challenge we have at the moment is that of patronage. There's serious patronage in the country, which has compromised even the educated.
Thank you. Next question.
Sorry, firstly, more of a comment. So two of the closest people in my life are from Zim. Actually, very emotional talking about Zim. I've been there a few times. Okay. How optimistic, because it's feeling very Debbie Downer in the room, are we about the media in Zim, particularly radio? That's it.
Again, I think Taurai should take this one.
I'll borrow a quotation from Jane Duncan, which Jane Duncan made the following observation in relation to the South African experience. There was tremendous pressure on the IBA to establish itself and begin a process of licensing. Delay led to rising frustration. In fact, two radio stations, Radio Sibonele and later Bush Radio, began broadcasting without a license as they were not prepared to wait any longer. In 1994, the IBA approached Parliament to allow it to issue one-year temporary community license. After receiving permission, it licensed the first station in December 1994. It proceeded to license a further 82 community radio stations between 1994 and 1996. Jane Duncan Broadcasting and the National Question, 2000, page 65. Thanks.
Okay, so basically you're saying that pressure from the grassroots is what actually drove institutional change.
I just wanted to drive on this point because I think this is not a Zimbabwean question. I think that actually, if we look at what's happening in our country, given the changeover in political administration, this notion of a new dawn, things are going to be reclaimed and everything else. I think where the how should we say, the disappointment and disillusionment sets in is when people put the most of their faith in a process of institutional, legislative, political, in other words, everything that is the legal side of things. And you do all the right things, which Zimbabweans have always done. Do all the right. And despite all of those things, despite your hard work and policy formulation, despite your lobbying, despite all of the things, you've got all the ducks lined up, you never get into the room, so to speak. And the reason why is that's because the political power remains basically the same. And here it's about economic power and getting into that room. So I think that the lessons here are one of political and strategic kind of thinking that, so it's not about being depressed, it's about being more creative and not doing the same things again and again, because then we will get into a situation where we believe we can't change these things.
Sorry, just got a few seconds left, but Taurai hasn't mentioned the legal case.
No, we don't have time.
Maybe not?
No,
Okay.
no. Yes, unfortunately, we're profusely out of time. I really apologize for this. This was most enlightening. I think we send our hearts, our minds to the people of Zimbabwe, especially as broadcasters. I think it is up to us to support their cause. Plurality of voice and diversity is important, especially in your journey of trying to institute liberalization within the country. So I totally get that. And for that, we wish you all the best of luck and love and light, and we should do something about it, right? I hope it's clear for that. Thank you.